Napoleon Bonaparte, Animal Farm, Coronavirus COVID-19 Conspiracy Theory number 4. A very well-known story about Napoleon Bonaparte was the conqueror. Animal Farm was one of his famous stories. So prior to this whole pandemic, we're talking about our current day and age now, with what we're going through or experiencing. The main concerns were so-called climate change. We're calling it so-called climate change if you'll watch the other video, why we don't believe in climate change. And it's worldwide devastation. What the real reason for climate change and why they've given it this name, we discussed this in that very video. So you can obviously go in, subscribe and maybe just have a look at whatever else is not covered by yourself, and just bring yourself up to speed so this makes more relevance in your life. This in turn created food shortages where the agricultural sector had been severely affected. This is obviously due to catastrophic damage as a result of inclement weather. Secondly, strikes, rebellion, protests, etc. Call it what you will, but there was a worldwide unrest. This is also bad for global governance, which can be easily overthrown, historically speaking. The people are well aware of how they have been deceived and that their basic human rights were being compromised. So this is a majority of the reason for which this unrest was taking place just prior to this pandemic occurring. Okay, so divide and conquer, which is one of the main ideology adopted by the CIA, which is the Central Intelligence Agency, believed to have originated with Napoleon Bonaparte, and this is why. So as we all know, in the Animal Farm, during the time of food shortages, Napoleon Bonaparte filled their food barrels, this is, with sand. And he topped them up with various kinds of food that obviously would exist at that time, creating the illusion that all was well and there was abundance. The reason for this, because had the world known the truth, there would have been a rebellion and he would have easily lost his position and perhaps his life as well in the process. So that's a similarity number 1. Okay, we're talking about the fact that there was food shortages at that time, and the same, we are experiencing that as well prior to this pandemic. The other thing is that we were experiencing rebellions or unrest prior to this, and now everything is just silent during lockdown, right? Okay, if we look at that, those are the similarities. We're just going to group that into number 1. Napoleon later introduced quarantine and isolation on creating an epidemic rumor. By doing this, he was able to divide and conquer the masses with ease because similarity number 2, fear. People are afraid of getting this virus, which is the most ironic thing ever, because they're not afraid of losing their lives in the strike. They're not afraid of possibly getting killed in, the shootings, where you don't necessarily have to die. You could just get incapacitated. You could get disabled. Things which are far worse than a disease, right? Or an epidemic. But people obviously get so scared of something that can kill you in an illness, disease, affliction, this type of area, that they would adhere to isolation and quarantine with ease, right? In our current coronavirus COVID-19 scenario, this isolation and quarantine achieves 2 results. Or shall I say more than 2 results here? Forgive me. Alright, so there's no rebellion now. Power remains with the few globalist elite and not in the hands of the people, which is where it lied throughout a lot of history. Right? So the moment this happens, people are all scared and indoors. Nobody witnesses what's really going out there because of the fear of this pandemic. Right? Number 2, significant reduction in carbon emissions in an effort to theoretically heal the world during this period. Alright? With all the damage that's taken place throughout all of history, from the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where we first began to use all these resources of the earth, fossil fuels and etc., the damage has occurred over this century at least, the last century at least. Even though we are seeing, I think in some countries, up to 70% healing in terms of, or reduction in emissions, obviously that would have an effect on the healing of that particular part of the world in terms of climate change. 21 days is not going to make a big difference with the damage that's been done throughout a century. Okay, so that makes no sense whatsoever. But nevertheless, this is another theory. The third is population reduction. So when we spoke about it, I think it was the second conspiracy theory where we spoke about Rodney Howard-Browne. Population reduction, the goal being 20%, is far easier during lockdown than with many witnesses around. Population reduction also will aid in the food crisis. It will lower carbon emissions and it'll have more manageable numbers for the globalist elite. Okay, in summary, some of the questions that were raised. Number one, does coronavirus or COVID-19 even exist? If it does, to what degree? Number two, is it blown out of proportion so that those who are killed by whatever other means are easily forgotten or remembered victims of this pandemic as opposed to a mass execution? Will the vaccine kill more people than the pandemic? Is this vaccine the mark of the beast? So these are some of the questions that are raised on this conspiracy theory for discussion. Send us your views.